This book, being different, uh, an Indian challenge to Western universalism. It's a book, a terse and very dense book, which tries to give a viewpoint which which is contesting a notion of a certain preeminence or hegemony, you can say it in a better way, of the civilization of Western civilization from a unique lens of trying to seeing things through the Indian context. Though I would say that the Eurocentric notions of exceptional uh, Western universalism has been contested civilizationally by people like Joseph Needham and many other peoples in their own way. But in the Indian context, the way Rajiv Malhotra's this book or this study stands maybe uniquely or different in the sense, maybe the his exceptionalism or his contestation of European or Western universalism is not only being contrasted or contested, but it's also seen that the sort of paradigm or theorization which this book goes through. At the end, you can see that he is also trying to give us a way or an alternative route, which might be which is a different route or different method. It may be a claim, or but it has its arguments how the dharmic the Western universalism versus the Dharmic way of approaching things, how you can tilt the ladder, or the things can be the exceptionalism, the Western exceptionalism can be better replaced by the Dharmic traditions or Dharmic viewpoint, which is maybe more the Western universalism, which is maybe 300-400 years, but the replacement of, or I will not say replacement, the contestation and the theory which is born out of those contestations has roots which are prior to Western civilization, which as compared to the recent thing. So in the book, he has started in a very nice way. He has there are various sections. So he has mainly, if you say his book, he has I'll just there are various chapters to it. I would rather say that the main thing which he is trying to say in the book is, I just so his book, I'll before going a brief epilogue or a detour what are the topics he's primarily discussing things, is basically he talks of embodied knowing versus history centricism. So what are the maybe the main points or contestations where he just takes his thesis. So the pillars of his thesis, or the four maybe arguments on which this book is basically stands. For example, he talks of embodied knowing versus the dharmic, and what are the contrasts, or what are the comparisons of dharmic and Judeo-Christian traditions. Maybe in the Judeo-Christian traditions, he also includes in the book about, you can also include Islam, but in the book is he talks of Islam in bits and pieces, but the contestations of the book is primarily Judeo-Christian traditions versus the Dharmic traditions, and Islam is footnote maybe to those two traditions. So he doesn't give, he starts somewhere, he writes that it's a part of a separate study. So what are the four things he's somewhere? What are the four things he is talking? He's Rajiv Malhotra. He is speaking of when he contests these two things. He talks of embodied knowing versus history centricism, integral unity versus synthetic unity, anxiety over chaos versus comfort with complexity and ambiguity, cultural digestion versus Sanskrit non-translatables. So these are broad topics, so which I'll just try to have a brief detour through it, and intermittently will try to elude what he wants to say in a certain the way, in a certain way. So if I start with what do you mean, what does he say when he says embodied knowing versus history centricism? So what he contests, the contestation of Raja Malhotra with regard to this first point, embodied know. So here he talks of what you mean by integral unity and synthetic unity. The contestation he feels or he argues is that the notions of the way the Western Judeo-Christian model of history, it's very much linear. So there is a definite slicing of time in terms of past, present, and future, and things go in future. So that consciousness or that understanding of time, and the understanding of time which is being which we purport in other traditions is somewhat is somewhat is it imports different viewpoints or a different outlook in the how we view fundamentally things, and that in a sense maybe for example, if I'll sequentially just serve through the various points, what he's trying to say is that, so what he says that the Western seeker does not approach the task with a clean slate. There has been a past conditioning as a result of his or her collective identity as a Jewish, Christian, or secular. So this is an important point that cannot be emphasized enough. The Western's nurse mental framework is already wired for certain values, attitudes, and categories. Therefore, what is termed universal is in effect largely Western in disguise. We shall see. So his the universalism which Western thinking, which may be linear, but according to him, even though you just take a frame which might be Western, but you consider it universal, but deep down it is not universal. It is also rooted in a certain history and certain historical experiences. And why it was universalized? So there may be certain bitter truths of history or lessons of history which might have been suppressed deliberately or for whatever reasons, which he is illustrating large in this book. So what I one point about this book is maybe the Raju Malhotra is not very much he doesn't hide things behind the ugly facts. He, in the process of trying to make things same, the sameness, or he's not interested in primarily to make a dialogue of to just have common to reach something common among civilizations. He is trying to address things even if they might look bitter or whatever that is. So those ugly facts which are there may be hidden or they are latent in the discourses. He is also interested to make those very facts come to fore, to the discomfort of maybe people from scholars here in India or outside also. For example, so this thing has this exercise or enterprise of the post colonial studies, or these have been taken by Edward Said, Ziauddin, and many other people. But what makes Rajiv Malhotra unique is he writes, he is not conflating with those constructions, but somehow he is placing his study within a particular unique historical milieu, which is rooted in the Dharmic traditions. So he has some critiques also for postmodernists also. So in the process of trying to, so he also is not agreeing with postmodernists also in the process of trying to deconstruct things. So they are also even displacing or derooting the people who can even adhere to something called culture or whatever you might call it. So they are even delegitimizing that very thing. So, for example, he quotes London-based Ziauddin Sarwar points out that postmodern criticism of nation states and their relative identities actually empowers imperialism insofar as it softens the prey. This is what I was saying, on behalf of predator empires by advocating the abandonment of distinctiveness in one-sided manner. This is so because the West does not practice what it exports. The call to abundant distinctiveness is propagated and promoted throughout a network of intellectuals in third world, nurtured and sustained by first world. So maybe, but I don't know whether he imports a certain deliberate exercise from the first world to the third world. But that deliberate exercise, maybe academic or otherwise, maybe it has some reasons or historical reasons or colonial reasons, which he has tried to give in the different, if you see the different passages of the book. So what, for example, when he talks of history, for example, he has the way how he constructs so history. So if I, so how he slowly is going to contest, his contestations are there. So when he talks of a history, he has a word. So in the Indian milieu or Indian cultural context, we don't talk of history. We talk of something called itihasa. So here comes the notions of how the mythos and the logos part of it. So what is history and what is logic and what is myth, what is folklore. So for example, uh, according to him, truth and not mere history is the concern for itihasa. So what is itihasa? So for itihasa, the truth is not. It's more important, and the notion of truth, it's maybe also deeply epistemic grounded thing. What you call truth in the Indian tradition may not be the truth in the Western tradition. So, but here I would say that the constructions of history versus myth and the historical facts, or what you call Judo-Christianic, according to Judo-Christian conditioning of history and myth as mutually exclusive. Means history and myth are mutually exclusive. This is very much, this construction is a very Western construction. And somehow he is not comfortable with this very idea of constructing, how you exclude myth and history. But in Indian tradition, itihasa together with narrative texts known as Puranas combine history and myth. Truth is not dependent upon history. Rather, history is a manifestation of it. The Dharmic relation between history and myth is thus not at all comparable to the Western relation between truth and fiction. So this is his point, for example. So, and in the same point, he writes that in the West, a powerful apparatus and elaborate process have evolved to present history, and the transformation of Western myths into fact remains a major preoccupation of Western humanities. So, underlying the historiography of Western historiography, maybe the more thing would be the philosophy of history, how we interpret history or historical facts. Maybe normally we say history is bare facts and what was. So there are different contestations of historians of interpreting facts. A Marxist may have his own way of his own frame of ideological frame of interpreting history. Toynbee, for example, has his own way of how civilizations rise and fall. Post-colonial historians have their own frame, and Rajiv Malhotra also has his own dharmic frame by which he not only locates history, how he interprets history not as history, but as itihasa. And itihasa has mythos and myth and history are not, they are somehow deeply intertwined. So the primal material of historians, whether they are artifacts, whether they are documents. So in the Indian tradition, Upanishads, Veds, these oral traditions, how he interprets them. So he has some point regarding the same. So now I just so this is what he is saying. So how Yoga Sutras, different Vedas, Upanishads, or in the text of Manu, maybe he has given arguments that the way the Western scholarship somehow delegitimizes or criminalizes a lot of textual understanding of ancient edicts or codifications. So that when you translate them through the Western frame, Western notions or Marxist understanding of class, categories, and so they somehow misrepresent or misplace things fundamentally, which is somehow, according to him, it's a disrespect to that tradition, and it leads to a lot of contestations. So, for example, he says change is not discontinuous, nor does it entail defeating prior institutions. So, this is what I'm saying. So, Western scholarship. So, there is not, when you talk of a revolution in the histories, French Revolution, Russian Revolution. So, you talk of as if there is some watershed in the previous thing. So, in the Indian context, it's not that things are moving in the things are moving in that, but there can be a slow progression, slow evolution of things, which may not be discernible. So for him, change is not discontinuous, nor does it entail defeating prior institutions. Prior institutions might be the oral traditions, the collective memory of different systems, Vedic systems, ancient systems, which is there, which has been there. So so in that thing, for example, when he also when introduces the scientific knowledge, what he says, scientific knowledge on the is not history centric. There is no history of science, but this is entirely different from role of history in Christianity. Sir Isaac Newton had a personal history, for example, but the events in his life did not result in gravitation. He merely discovered what was already there. Even if one proved Newton never lived or he was an impostor, the principles of physics would remain intact and others could rediscover the same independently. So that's it. Yeah, thank you. So I'm just surfing through this very dense book. So, but in the process of trying to, prove his particular point, he has deftly used arguments which seem plausible or which are plausible. For example, when he talks of in the chapter which I talked of integral unity versus, he talks of the Western, so the Dharmic traditions have a some integral unity as compared to the synthetic unity, and a unity which is imposed from above, and unity which is from within. These two, the dharmic unity is somewhat innately better or than the later. For example, my integral theory of dharma proposes homogeneity and yet identifies common principles, especially in contrast with the Western assumption. The history centric worldview results in synthetic unity and not integral unity. So these different when we superpose different eras of time or different ideas and how Western civilization has evolved, so there are various concepts, they are conflating with each other, and supposedly peace or order or unity which is seen from outside, when you see deep down, so there is some discord or element of discord or element of stress which there supposedly thing which looks unified. So for example, so where does that unity or disunity, synthetic unity and um, synthetic and integral unity, what are, so deep down he also talks, for example, what are in the notions of time in Hinduism and Judo-Christian traditions. For example, what he talks of notion of time, for example, in Hinduism, creation itself is cyclical. A universal comes into being and eventually passes away, reverting to an unmanifest state, then lies dormant until it emerges again at the commencement of another cycle. This pattern is natural as inhalation and exhalation and is repeated throughout eternity. Creation is not separate from God, since divine manifests itself in part as cosmos, not merely in the cosmos. The entire cosmos is intelligent and ultimately one. The divine is thus one with yet separate from the cosmos itself. The universe arises out of ultimate reality, not for any reason we can conceptualize, but simply because this is its nature. So this is the dharmic way of looking at universe. The notion of time is cyclical and it is eternal, and how the creator is the related with the notion of universe. So, but so he goes on at he is in the next paragraph explaining how is it different from the way of monotheistic traditions. How monotheistic traditions are actually they view this notion of time. For example, the view is different from monotheism, which has one God governing the universe from above, and it is antithesis in the West. Pantheism, which envisages envisages the cosmos as God, but without any external God. The Dharmic theism includes both of these notions. The Upanishads, for instance, view divine as simultaneously transcendent, external or untouched, or para and immanent, the very composition of cosmos, or apara. God is not merely the creator and hence the external force of many splendored world. God is that world. Everything is ultimately a distinct expression of Brahman. Brahman and the manifestations of Brahman are inseparable. Unity in diversity is thus the nature and essence of reality. Western philosophers who got this idea of Hinduism gave it name panentheism, not to be confused with pantheism. So here comes, so the crux of it is the central unifying principle is the interconnectedness of everything past, which I seen, past, present, and future, be it physical or non-physical. This idea of impermanence brings with it infinite diversity, because there is no enduring things at all. Reality then is unity fostered by interconnectedness of ever-changing world. Its diversity shaped by this very impermanence. So here he is trying to say what are the fundamental the notions of time, which may be linear or cyclical, and the notion of creator or Brahman, and how the notion of creator is also slightly different from the notion of creator in the Judeo-Christian traditions, including Islam, which he has not talked here, but he is just, you can include that very thing here. And the particular notions of para and apara, so he talks of those very things in the later chapters. So in this book, I would rather say that even though Rajiv Malhotra is not, is somewhere differentiating the earlier parts of how in their earlier past how Judaism, Christianity had evolved in the historical milieu, and the later secularists or secular universalists, or the tradition, how the Western civilization or Western tradition evolved with the coming of secular modernists, or the dialogue between the secular modernists and idealists of the earlier era. So he is also critiquing, maybe he is not totally critiquing the religious understanding of the Western civilization, but he is trying to say that the appropriation of a particular understanding of religious or idealistic understanding of civilization can be better understood or better replaced by a particular dharmic view, which may be more universal. And a lot of attempts to contest Western universalism, including postmodern theories, can be better understood if we replace the frame, which is otherwise considered as not as undisputed. And for example, when he says in the biblical doctrine of creation ex nihilo, the universe is created out of nothing and is first cause and a beginning of time. There is nothing equivalent in Dharmic traditions. Time is without beginning. The universe is constituted without beginning. Prior to this universe, there was another, and before that, yet another in an infinite series of universes. With no first cause. In the famous hymn of creation in the Rig Veda, precise origin of the cosmos is not known. So I'd say that now he talks of, for example, views of relative knowledge. So the famously, so in the Rig Veda, there's a statement: "Truth is one, and wise men call it by different names." Affirms this wisdom in recognizing the pluralities generating by different points of view. So the Western notion of secular modernity or Judeo-Christian traditions, how it has evolved in the later part of the 19th and 20th century, even though it has the capacity of absorbing different viewpoints and different schools of thought, but he is saying that the Vedic wisdom of saying that the notion of plurality, unity in diversity is more engrossed or more articulated or more, I would say, more or I would say expressed. The expression is more profound in these. The truth is one, the wise men call it by different names. The freedom of the Dharmic traditions to reach to that reality by a different means is more there as compared to the thing which you find in Western universalism, which might be hegemonic in a certain sense. And so he quotes, for example, Troy Wilson, for example, when he says the modern concept of nation does not harmonize with Hindu emphasis on primary human relationship. Yet there is one factor within Hinduism upon which India can be built, that is integrating quest itself. Integrating quest itself. Inclusiveness, not exclusiveness, is the principle of Hinduism. So this is how he is. So these notions have been maybe Jawaharlal Nehru in his discovery of India also. He's talking about the same things again and again, but maybe his frame was more modernistic. He tried to imagine the idea of India as a, even though as a geographical, as a construct, more being trying to impose certain Western values into the Indian contexts, in the Indian historical past, how he grafted or how he tried to make a unison or union between the two. So, but Rajiv Malhotra, he has more. He wants to even replace. He is not comfortable in accepting the Western hegemony when he is trying to understand the Indian frame. Hmm. Yes, yes. So the another critique, what where he talks of that other cultures and peoples are seen as resources to be devoured and digested in order to fill the vast emptiness at its heart. So that the Western civilization has maybe, so maybe in the process of trying to universalize things, it has taken, digested, appropriated cultures, knowledge, art forms, um, resources in a way which has not really, because the frame, the underlying frame by which it has tried to digest or assimilate or integrate things, it has not, it's not innately natural. That's why it's creating this sort of emptiness. Because Western civilization has maybe on one side there are Hellenic roots to it, and on the other side we take Judo-Christian or Roman. So the combination of these two things. But for example, Hellenism and Hebraism, what he talks of. For example, both Hellenism and Hebraism arise out of wants of human nature and address themselves to satisfying those wants. But their methods are so different. They lay stress on different points and call into being by their respective disciplines such different activities that face which human nature presents, and when it passes from hands of one to them to those of other is no longer same. So these are the things what I'm trying to say. So what how he critiques is that what he says, the Renaissance was stimulated by the rediscovery of many philosophical and scientific texts of ancient Greeks. These were transmitted through Islamic scholars who were much less resistant to Greek science than the Roman church was. But here he has a positive view of Islam. Maybe Islam had something to the when the process of translation or transliteration took place in medieval sciences. Maybe Islamic scholars were less resistant to Greek scholars. The inherent contradictions of these Western traditions, whether it was Hebraic or Greek. So the how the evolution has not been that smooth in the various eras. And in the various eras, when the knowledge transfer of knowledge or Latinization took place, to the baton of scholarship was carried by other civilizations, Islamic civilization. And when they rediscovered the same thing, so it was in another story. So Now I'll talk of what he's called order and chaos. Order and chaos means the inherent notions of how maybe the Western, how to a Western mind, the Indian, there is chaoticity inherent in it, and the idea of classification, systematization, and order, which are not, they are innate constructs on which Western edifice of Western civilization is there. Even thinkers like Lord Macaulay, and they derided the West Eastern civilization or Hinduism too chaotic and too disorderly. So, but Rajiv Malhotra has tried to give, he has said that the reverse is maybe true. The emphasis on maybe the element of chaos or seeing things through multiple perspectives without contradiction is a virtue, not vice. And it has helped Western Indian civilization through its historical milieu to negotiate differences, disagreements, and solve a lot of problems in a peaceful and orderly manner. So in terms of so giving different things in terms of aesthetics, in terms of morality, and in terms of truth also. So so the other thing about which for example, a lot of things he talks about. There's a chapter called non-translatable Sanskrit versus digestion. So what he talks of that, even here somewhere to talk that when the process of colonization, he has very much talked of these things, that even in the process of when we appropriate or translate words of Sanskrit or Indic languages, so the Western words or the applied translations are not, you cannot, they are too inaccurate, or they don't depict the original words, maybe more profounder, or they may encompass a larger reality or a picture. For example, he talks of that something called Vedas personify this primordial vibration called as Vak. For example, Kashmiri Shaivism teaches that there are 4 levels of Vak: unmanifest, subtle, potential, mental image, and outer expression. So, according to the Shiva Sutras, ordinary knowledge comes from phenomenal associations, and this knowledge relates to the outer world. But the associations themselves need something to bind them together, and the energy that does so is Matrika. Matrika strings together words and symbols, turning them into language that we understand. So he talks of things like Shabd Brahman and for example, what he talks of, for example, Islam too. But in Jewish and Islamic traditions, Hebrew and Arabic, respectively, are usually seen as created by an external god, where in Sanskrit, 3 vibrations are the ultimate reality itself, called Nada, the Brahman, from which the creation emanates. So he is in a way. So what I was talking of, Rajiv Malhotra in this book is not interested primarily in trying to find unity among the monotheistic and the Dharmic religions. It also goes very much effort in trying to say what are the subtle points where differences are there, and those differences ought to be celebrated, and those differences have some profound manifestations or realizations which make a lot of things which make things different in a very profound way. And he's very much allergic to the word or something called tolerance, which is very much hallmark of Western civilization, or notions of when we appropriate things in Western universalism. So the very word tolerance, he smacks that fundamentally this tolerance has some intolerance in it. So which is not the way the Dharmic traditions, the idea of accepting the different viewpoints without violence is there, which is embedded there as a part of that tradition, and this has to be at least appreciated. For example, in visual representation, there is no uniquely true image of a given deity. Ramanujan writes, not unity in Aristotelian sense, but coherence seems to be the end. So this is what I'm trying to say. 34. So this is a very terse book. You can read it, and he has, for example, given these charts: Christianity and maybe Judaism and Hinduism, and how he has there is he is very goes on pains in trying to say that dharma is not law or religion. So edicts, the mosaic, the monotheist, the edicts of, for example, law of Moses, Judaism. So it's very different from dharma. Dharma is not entirely dry law or edict which has been given from above as a part of a revelation or as a creator from outside. So dharma is something innate or innately there, and it had its own frame of addressing things and issues. So which can, for example, many critics will say that Rajiv Malhotra is also trying to justify a caste system or Hindu order, but somehow the way he has very interesting way of interpreting jati or varna system. So maybe people will not necessarily agree to his interpretations of how he sees it. And maybe one thing is that how his notions of saint and prophet and is there, and the notions of karma in his Christianity, Judaism, and Hindu traditions is there. So how he sees karma and how he sees this thing redemption. So those are very interesting things he has tried to see in the book. How he says that in the notion of prophet or avatar, how the notion of prophet who just communicates the eternal wisdom of the creator from external to it is so it's different from how a yogi sees it, how a rishi sees things, and there are various denominations or of how a sage, a yogi, a rishi, or an avatar. So how even the idea of the notions of how the combination of godhead and manhood, godhead and manhood, how much they can be combined. Maybe in Judaism and Islam, maybe they will not entirely agree to it, that the combination of God, there are sects in Islam or maybe Judaism, so mystical things where you can have the combination of God and manhood, but it's not allowed. So he's very goes at pains in trying to explain it, what are the different divine manifestations of it and how it creates a lot of differences. So when you talk of Godhead and manhead, he has in the book he is trying to say that there are the Catholic Christianity, the Catholic sect of Christianity, and the notions of avatar. You can have, in spite of being their differences being there, but there can be some dialogue in the larger sense of the word. But that dialogue is sometimes being also contested uh, by different appropriations, because in the yogic traditions, it's a part of a self-discovery. So the truth is not out there. We have to find it as a part of human endeavor or whatever that is. And from that, the notion of sin and notion of salvation or redemption may take different values, because from Christianity the notion of original sin and how it so can treat. So I'll coming to my last part of the book is contesting Western universalism. So what Western universalism? So which was I was trying to say that in the first when I started. So how he is trying to say that the Western notions or Western underlying frame of Western universalism, the consensus which is there, which has been although contested, but the contestation has not been to the point where the hegemony of Western civilization has been contrasted totally. Although the emergence of other Chinese civilization and other things, it's on the fore, but still the preponderance of is there. So how he is contributing this to this question that how would the but he is contesting this notion Western universalism via Indian or Dharmic traditions. For example, he says Western revisionism either tries to make non-Westerners non-minor players on the stage of Christian salvation history, or seeks to draw them into the story of how Western reason and science have triumphed over primitive mentalities and culture. Both Abrahamic traditions and secularism are culpable in this. While Christianity claims a divine mandate to superimpose its own history centrism on the entire world, thinkers of enlightenment have also developed various concepts, absolutes, and endowed these with the universal status. So this is how and in this he has been very much at pains of how this Western appropriation of Eastern things, it has some it is rooted in a particular era of maybe 18th century or 19th century, when for example the texts of classical India which indicating a civilization with great attainments in drama, epic poetry, fable, advanced abstract thinking, medicine and mathematics and astronomy, it was till 18th century was there. But when the notions how the idea of the subject of Indology and how the knowledge of Sanskrit, which got the Western scholarship or European scholarship appropriated it, digested it, and then did not give the due credit from where they had taken things. The whole department is at pains explaining how even great philosophers like the entire Hegelian tradition is basically in contrast to those his debate was with those scholars who had very much benefited with the concepts taken from the Indic traditions or Sanskrit or scholarship which was taken from India. So why they did not he properly appropriated? Because they were not rooted in the Indic traditions, and that's why they could, after some time, even if they took things, digested them, they could not give proper reference or to the parent thing which they from which those ideas were taken. And which might have just according to him led to colonialism, and racism was justified in a certain sense. He's going on pains to explain, for example for example uh, Ranajit Guha is one of the historians. He's quoting them. For example, included are not ethnic or geographical abstractions. They make up a greater part of humanity with its cultures, literatures, religions, philosophies, and so forth. The philosopher goes through the lot systematically to dig them out one by one and tip them into wasteland of prehistory. What is discarded is not only the past these so-called historyless people live by in their everyday existence, but also the modes adopted by their languages to integrate these past into prose of their respective worlds. In this way, world history has promoted the dominance of one particular genre of historical narrative over all the others. This is the way the dominance has come out to be four. So, so what Guha points out that Hegel marginalized India and China. At the same time, he praises the slave societies of ancient Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, and America. So the very notion of distinct West is a relatively recent in history, prior to which English, Irish, German, Italians, Greek, and Spaniards all saw themselves as distinct cultures mired in conflicts with each other and not parts of a cohesive European civilization. So the Western frame of looking at the Eastern civilizations having made up of parts and there is no inherent or integral unity in them is itself also a recent thing. That cohesion is basically mapped or mirrored on something which tries to find a unity uh, because of the internal disunity which was previously existing there. So apparent unity is has an underlying disunity to it. So now, what are the common responses of, for example, of Western uh, unity? So how fundamentally? So interestingly, this page 334. So he has given a chart. So how he wants to see it. So he says on the one hand, for example, so if he wants to reverse the gaze, so if somebody is interpreting you or judging you before he is going to judge you, so he wants to see it before even you are going to contest his judgments. So you have to see his frame. So your proper response of judging that response which you want to judge. So what is the frame? How we can judge it? For example, there are two categories of judging things. For example, one is for example, colonial Indology and humanities, today's studies, Southeastern studies. So you can have Dharmic categories where he has quoted scholars like Marriott, Ramanujan, and others who use Dharmic categories, but they would work within the Western system. But what Malhotra is saying that so he wants to study Western categories via Dharmic tradition. But that Dharmic tradition is not ensconced or anchored in the Western traditions. So the scholarship is in making. So that question maybe, so the critique for maybe the part, you can also say there can be critique of Rajiv Malhotra in the sense that the relative absolutism of the which even though that may be rich the critique may be that to study the notions of language, it's not a mosaic. So your frame of dharmic thing and having a dharmic frame, so so you have to study the original languages. So it's also maybe very tough. Sanskrit, those what are the oral traditions, how we can just see it. What is it? For example, our understanding of us, how they. So you are assuming that there has been what I should say disruption in the disruption in trying to see things. But if you say Indian civilization, it's a continuous history of past, and there are many parts to those parts, and they are in constant evolution with each other. So how, so in what you take as a dharmic tradition, I'm not able to properly articulate it. So what I'm trying to say is, maybe the criticism might not be, so what I'm trying to say that even to have a dharmic frame is not an easy, it's very much a challenging thing, because the notion of language and the evolution of language and the notions of ancient wisdom and our understanding of that wisdom is also very much complex, and how we can reconstruct in that very thing, because there may be some portions of indic traditions which might be in in how Western tradition has also evolved. For example, Jawaharlal Pandit Nehru, maybe there are traditions like even Rajiv Malhotra has also talked about Charvak traditions, materialistic traditions. So your understanding of Indian traditions may be Dharmic traditions, maybe as if it's Western appropriation of Indian traditions. You can map them, but the non-Western appropriations, which are in direct conflict with the Western appropriations or Western traditions, how we can construct those concepts, and from that point of view, how we can view or present an alternate case which may be more profound than what is existing, or the hegemony of the universal Western universalism which you want to contest. It's a fundamental way. And what he calls in his words, what he also calls Purva Paksha, and what the alternative he is giving is that of Sapeksha Dharma. So where, for example, so how he is trying to say, how the frame he is trying to develop is that the intention of participants must not convert. So he wants to have a dialogue with a dharmic tradition, with the Abrahamic religions, and not trying to prove the superiority, but he is trying to say that maybe also trying to prove the summit, but he is trying to say that the dharmic traditions have something better to offer to the world at large and to themselves also. So in the end, he is also using the how Gandhi he has tried to exemplify the notions of dharmic traditions, and how he had the Western notions of centralization, industrialization. He exemplified certain streaks of inventiveness or innovations, which was original in some sense, and he could recreate that dharmic value system. So here I would rather say how Nehru, Jawaharlal, if you read Jawaharlal's Nehru's the discovery of India in 1940s, so he also had a very he also was enamored by Indian past, and when he was enamored by past, he also was trying to create a certain unity of Indian tradition. He was enamored by Upanishadic texts. He talks in that discovery how he was enamored by verses, laws, edicts. So although he is repellent for organized religions, he somewhere he says that he cannot ignore the wisdom of the ancient texts. But somehow he wants to, Nehru is somehow interested in creating the idea of India in a way which is not in contestation with the modern Western notions of Western civilization. Western, so he somehow accepts the notions of liberal, the debates of, for example, early 20th century Britain, the liberals of liberal secular traditions, or the frame of utilitarians, or that frame which was existing in the Britain, how he took it and how he tried to reconstruct the idea of India in a certain way which was not in conflict with the Western value system. So this is 50 years back, maybe. But Raju Malhotra, being of our time, so he has his own idea of India. Here he is someone contesting maybe this Nehruvian idea of India in a subtle way, where he puts more faith or more emphasis in revisiting or evaluating or revisiting the the Dharmic traditions or ancient value systems, and reintegrating them in a way to the contemporary times, not ipso facto, but how to make them relevant in our times. So he feels that the Dharmic traditions have in them, for example, when he talks of different schools of it's reached not only, for example, when he talks of Naga Arjuna, when he talks of his logic, there is nothing, there is something called nothing, and it is not, it is nothing and nothing is also an category. And when he talks of, for example, in when he talks of the contestations of Aristotelian logic, a statement is true, it is not, a statement cannot be true, and a statement is true or not true, a statement is not true and true. Well, there are four. You can draw four propositions. A statement is true. It's not true. It is true or not true. It is neither true nor false. So there can be four categories. So the complex logic, for example, which is there, which have Chettiskoti logic. So people who have talked of these logic, for example, even when he talks of, for example, seven possible forms of statement which can be formally expressed. A thing is, it is not, it is and it is not, it is indescribable. Four, it is and is indescribable, it is not and is indescribable. Seventh, it is not, and it and is indescribable. So he talks of from logic to philosophy to ethics to culture. So if you revisit, or if you the Dharmic or ancient wisdom, and it has something more to offer to world as compared to the evolution of Western universalism. And in its form, it has the potential of solving a lot of problems, from ecology to the cohesion, the social cohesion, uh, tranquility, and a lot of problems or attendant things which have been created in the Western civilization, which are basically we have misappropriated, or we have put a frame, one frame on another frame, which is somehow misfit to the innateness of the values on which Dharmic traditions or Indic civilization has been there. So it's an interesting book. So there are terse and dense arguments. So that's this is so I just end this book at this. I'll just end it this note. Thanks.